Officially, it has been a year since Joe Biden was inaugurated, 1 year into his presidency, and there's a lot to discuss, but was there all that much to comment on? Meaning, like, accomplished? This is the big question right now. Joe Biden, of course, ran as the stable candidate, the one who was going to be the alternative to the far right, to bring democracy back. He talked about being able to work with conservatives and Republicans in Congress, that bipartisanship was the way we were going to get through this crisis and that we would have less extreme partisanship in this country. But it doesn't look like that actually is happening. Whether he's trying or not is one thing, but it might just be that our country is too far gone. It is the partisanship is too extreme. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that working people, as we all know, have been abandoned by most of our government over the last 4 decades. The Democratic Party is not necessarily reflective of a working person's party. There are definitely working people in the Democratic Party, but they're not the ones who are in power. They're not the ones calling the shots. Now you see, over the last, I'd say 6 years, since the primary between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, you've seen a lot of folks wake up. Of course, this didn't start with that primary, but it really accelerated, at least in the political class. You have folks who decided to support Bernie Sanders instead of the establishment Democrat, Hillary Clinton. And then a couple of years later, you saw waves of progressives run in 2018, run and win, run again. In New York, we had a legislature that turned from being a very, very neoliberal legislature that was working directly with Republicans to becoming a Democratic legislature that is, in the Senate in particular, progressives rule the Senate. But that happens every couple of years. A different group of people becomes woke to progressive working class politics. I have great news for you all. Hear me out on here. It's finally hitting the donor class. When the donor class is like, oh, wow, the Democratic Party is not what it really seems to be when they're pitching us. When they're upset, things are about to shift. When the View comments on how Joe Biden is not doing enough and needs to stop working with Republicans, things are about to go down.
So hours from now, the Senate will begin the votes on the Voting Rights Reform Bill, which hinges on challenging filibuster rules, something that Democratic Senators Sinema and Manchin still say they oppose. So some Democrats say, well, you may oppose it, but we are going to primary you behind in 2024 if they prevent this bill from passing. But Manchin seems unfazed. Take a look.
I've been primary my entire life. That would not be anything new for me. I've never run an election. I wasn't primary. This is West Virginia. It's rough and tumble. We're used to that, so bring it on.
Oh. Yes, well, it's never been quite as rough and tumble as this. Because you see, when you say to poor people, and basically that's what you're doing, we don't care how you vote, you'll vote how I tell you to vote. Poor people don't like that. They don't like it. And so you might have been set before and you could do rough and tumble. Let's see how rough and tumble you actually are. How do you see this playing out?
It's fascinating that Bernie Sanders considers them Democrats, because I don't.
Yeah.
But I was just saying before to you that I think that Manchin has shown some of his cards that we didn't see before, sort of what you were just sort of saying, that we now know that he's in bed with the coal industry and the fossil fuel industry, that his daughter, this is an interesting point, his daughter was a CEO of the pharmaceutical company that was caught gouging the price of EpiPens a few years ago and making big donations to his campaign at the same time. This is a guy who basically doesn't want the poor people in his state to have a child tax credit because he thinks they will use the money for drugs. And he doesn't want paid sick leave because it might encourage people to lie so they can go on hunting trips. Why are the West Virginians
putting up with this?
Why will they put up with this man who doesn't give a hoot about them, the environment, or the Democratic Party, or the country at this point?
Donors are now saying that they're not going to give to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema anymore. Groups that have supported them in the past, like Emily's List, are now saying if Kyrsten Sinema continues this behavior, they're no longer going to support her, partly because their donors said, we are not giving to Emily's List if you continue to support Kyrsten Sinema. And then the most elite group of donors, as New York Times reported a couple of months ago, they said unless Joe Biden takes voting rights seriously, they're no longer giving to the Democratic Party. They're on strike. Will this be the moment when the establishment starts to listen? On the eve of Joe Biden's 1-year anniversary into being president, he gave a very long press conference. The press has been angry because he has not been appearing in press conferences. Well, he made up for it because he gave the longest press conference in history as president. And I watched it. And let's just roll this real quick. This little snip from the press conference on BBB, the Build Back Better Act.
That you're confident
Yes.
that major chunks of Build Back
Yes.
Better can pass. Are you breaking it up? Does that
Yes,
mean-
well, it's clear to me that that we're going to have to probably break it up. I think that we can get, and I've been talking to a number of my colleagues on the Hill, I think it's clear that we would be able to get support for the $500+ billion for energy and the environmental issues that are there, number one. Number two, I know that the two people who've opposed, on the Democratic side at least, support a number of the things that are in there. For example, Joe Manchin strongly supports early education, 3 and 4 years of age, strongly supports that.
Well, so they say that, right? And this is their game now is, okay, well, Joe Manchin, you support this, then show us. We're going to break these bills up and we want to see it, because when you lump them all into one bill, it's very hard to message. I think people understand that Build Back Better is very important for the economic recovery of this country, but most Americans may not know every single piece of this bill. And if you break it up, now it can be embarrassing for Joe Manchin when he says he was for that and now he's against it, because you know that's what's going to happen. And it's also harder for lawmakers to be influenced by certain parties. So when you have it all in one bill, the pharmaceutical industry might be against reducing pharmaceutical costs, but they're tanking the whole bill as a result. Or the real estate industry may be against eviction moratoriums that might be included in the bill, or whatever. I mean, there's so many different interests. So one interest can tank an entire bill. So if you break it up, those interests are definitely going to be present for each of those individual bills, but not as powerful. With that being said, I don't believe the buck stops at Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema. I was quoted in a piece in NBC a couple of days ago. Let's put that up. It came out yesterday, where they asked from multiple different folks. Jonathan Allen from NBC, he's the author of Shattered, if you recall that book on the Hillary Clinton presidential run. Jonathan Allen asked different folks in the Democratic Party where they stood and on Joe Biden's record-long press conference. And you know, I gave I'll give you my full quote that didn't really make it in, but just so you guys know what I actually told him. And this is, I thought about it because I had a couple of different takes on this, but this is basically what I said to him. The stakes are too high for performance politics. Great on President Biden for holding a record-long press conference, but until he seriously champions the PRO Act and uses his pen to eliminate student debt, I worry the Democrats will lose a generation to the far right who has invested in every corner of this country. The administration is still acting incrementally in response to the economy and has been slow in basic pandemic response, as we saw with the at-home test debacle. Austerity should not be the answer when working people are in the worst spot that they've been in decades. Biden needs to channel LBJ and not let Manchin and Sinema ride his agenda. But simultaneously, he has executive power that could keep Democrats in office with the ability to get us out of this crisis. The buck does not stop at Joe Manchin. It's with President Biden. And I say that because, rightfully so, we are very frustrated with Manchin and Sinema. But with that being said, there are levers that could hold them accountable, which I think they're trying to do in a more, by breaking up the bill. But Senator Schumer has a lot of power, committee power, investigative power, because Joe Manchin, of course, has his own conflicts. And then, of course, President Biden has the power of the pen. I think so many folks are worried that if we don't pass this, the Democrats are going to lose the Senate and the House. And then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. You're going to have a lot more Madison Cawthorns or Hawthorns, whatever you're going to have a lot more Lauren Boebarts in office if they don't pass something. But if they don't pass something, they can simultaneously do so much with the power of the pen. When we talk about eliminating student debt, we're not even talking about the private debt. This is just federal debt. This is what with a signature, he can transform a generation, can empower them, give them the ability to live. I mean, I'm a millennial and I'm almost 40 years old. And I don't know a world without student debt. And I know so many others feel that way because you got to pay that debt first before you pay your bills. If we want a stronger country, that is something that Joe Biden can have as his legacy. And I hope he does it before the election. And there's so much more he can do. He says he's supportive of unions, the PRO Act, go and champion it, campaign for it. This will transform the country. It'll empower unions. It'll make it so that the Democratic Party is vibrant again and stronger. So with that, we have many fights ahead of us at once. Biden can do much more, much more, and we should be pressuring him to do so.